All right, welcome everyone. It is Wednesday, March 23rd, 6:31. This is a regularly scheduled select board meeting. This is a remote only meeting, which means that the public body is meeting electronically. And consistent with the temporary provisions of Act 78, that no designated physical meeting location is available. Please note that while we strive to provide means for those attending remotely to participate in the public comment period, there may be technical difficulties or reasons that otherwise prevent or interrupt remote public participation. We provided a number for some technical assistance matters on the agenda. I'll only say right now for this meeting, we'll take public comments for all items on the agenda. Board members will be preferenced in our conversations and our discussions, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes and state at least your name before saying anything else. Generally, I should say public comments are made in the form of a comment, and questions will be for clarification and information, but not for substantial discussion. Okay. That being said, the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Mary. Is there a second? Okay, I see Rob's hand, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is public comment for items that are not on the agenda. Would anyone like to make a 3-minute public comment? Please, to do that, please raise your Zoom hand. It says raise hand on the bottom of the screen, and if you're on the phone, please press *6. Doug Wilberding, go ahead.
Hey everybody, Doug Wilberding, 1329 Turnpike Road in Norwich. Just a comment, and I guess I should direct to you, Roger, just as chair, correct?
Thank you. Yes, that is the procedure. Thank you.
Okay. So the comment is within the packet, there were some letters. I think for your planning, each select board member, a few had them in there, and probably there are a few pending. I believe Mary Layton had a comment in her letter regarding the trustees of public funds and green lending program. And I just wanted to point out, the other trustees are on here so they can weigh in, but the investment policy from the trustees of public funds has been presented to the board a couple of years ago when it was executed. And it follows the VLCT template, which is on their website. And it also follows the Vermont state statute that's in the template. If needed, we can get a copy of what we sent you guys, the executed policy, but we can also get the link from VLCT. If you just Google VLCT, Trustees of Public Funds, investment policy, it comes up, it's the first thing. I think a couple things are important. One, it's not taxpayer dollars that are invested, and it is actually cemetery funds that are invested. Current yields with CDs are, and the other trustees can correct me, but it's somewhere around 25 to 50 basis points, depending on the CD when it was put in place. Maybe it's a little bit higher, but we have several maturing mid-year this year. And so just for your benefit, the thought process on green lending, as an example, would be to lend to organizations in town that would assist them with, say, the Historical Society, for example. They do a fundraiser every year to raise money for their heating oil. So in theory, if they replace that with solar or something similar that's green, or if they had a Tesla Powerwall, and if they obtained a loan from us, again, in theory, hypothetically, that would reduce their heating costs and would also create a clean source of fuel, a heating source for them. So that's behind the policy, and it's within the Vermont statutes for the investment policy. The policy is actually way more broad with the state than what we've done. It goes as far as allowing people to trade stocks and bonds, and it's far more expansive. So our policy is very conservative and it mimics the VLCT format. So just thought I'd bring that up, and we can send you that information again if you want.
Great, thank you so much. I know Mary will may very well have some questions, but perhaps in a future space. But thank you for the information for the moment.
My pleasure.
Any other public comments for items not on the agenda? Okay. All right. Not seeing any hands, I will move on to the consent agenda. So we took a tiny little break, mercifully, which is why you're seeing correspondence from a while ago, right? Mostly correspondence concerning Upper Loveland Road that didn't make a previous packet deadline. So that's what you're seeing. And then you also, I will say that the Beaver Meadow Road from Peter Orner will be at least implicitly addressed later in the agenda. And so finding no reason to specifically pull anything, can someone please make a motion to approve the consent agenda? Go ahead. Are you making a motion, Marcia? You're on mute.
Sorry. No, I know that they're old, but having just seen them, I thought there are two things that merit consideration and for pulling, and one is the Franny Enid letter and the other one is the J. Benson.
So procedurally, how I'm going to do this in sort of the new start, right? Is we can pull them, and you're welcome to make a brief comment, but I don't want to use correspondence as a way to lengthen our agendas in the future. So if you would like to make a motion pulling those for a brief comment, I would support that.
Yes, that's what I said.
Great.
So the brief comment is that—
Do you want to make a motion to pull them first?
I would like to make a motion to pull them.
Is there a second? And to be clear, what are you pulling? You're pulling the Franny Enid and the J. Benson correspondence from the packet?
Yes.
For
Yes.
discussion? Okay. Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it just so that we can discuss.
Okay. Thank you, Claudette. Okay. Any discussion? Or we should vote. Yes. All in favor of pulling these materials from the consent agenda, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Go ahead. What is the discussion, Marcia?
Thank you. As to the Franny Enid one, I think that our rules, whatever you want to call them, about civility and respect are important. And I think we should ask that this be resubmitted without the negative term NIMBY in it, or NIMBYism, because everyone, including this letter, is valid. And we need to make sure that people are being respectful of different opinions in town. And as to the J. Benson letter, the change in size of the project to which he refers, I think, is relevant to the town and the decision that was made previously. If it's true that this was changed after the town made a decision, this would be a material change, which perhaps the PUC would flag or a court would decide in the future. But in advance of that, I would recommend the town revisit the site based on a difference in the size of the project, if that is what happened.
Okay, thank you for your comments on the correspondence. Any further comments on this correspondence? Okay. I'll call the question on accepting and receiving this correspondence then. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Thank you.
Wait. Sorry, Roger.
Yes.
One I was asking not to accept until it was changed. So I didn't want to lump them together. Could we separate it?
Can you clarify that, please, until what was changed?
So Marcia, there's no basis to request. When we make a motion, we are receiving the correspondence. We are receiving it. We're telling our people that we have read, received, and appreciate it, right? And that when we pull it for anything further, you're taking the privilege to make a comment for the public record. But that is the purpose of that. There's no basis to, I would say, to expect a revision to someone's public correspondence to the board.
Right? Can we at least ask that people in future be respectful of other citizens when they put in correspondence? I think we need to foster a culture of respect and polite dialogue.
And I appreciate that you have made that comment for the public record.
Thank you then.
Okay, Miranda, you have your hand up. Were you seeking clarification on what we were doing?
Yeah, I never heard a motion to accept anything. I think you, or did I miss something?
Yes, we had a motion to pull. Well, apologies. So that benefits from clarity. We had a motion to pull the correspondence,
Right.
and then
That was voted on.
And
Yep.
so then you're right. Then I asked for a vote to receive the correspondence, but I should back and ask for a second for my motion on that.
Okay.
And
I'll second it.
Okay, so thank you for everyone's help. So Mary seconded that, and now, and I made the motion, and now we can re-vote for the record if we would like to, which we should. So all in favor of receiving and accepting this correspondence following our discussion of it, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Miranda, for your work on that. Okay, next, go ahead, Claudette.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
That's great. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Mary. Any discussion on the consent agenda? Go ahead, Claudette.
I just have a couple questions on the AP warrant.
Sure, Fielding is here, so he can help us too.
On page 3 of the warrant that we're approving tonight, there was a $1,500 fee for somebody called Tustin for help, and there was no further explanation.
Okay, so Rod, go ahead.
Hi, that is the last name of the DPW consultant that's been working with us with DPW.
Okay, thank you. And then I think that was it.
Oh, great. Cheryl, do you have a comment?
Yes, Cheryl Lindbergh, quick question. In the past, the AP warrants have identified the expense accounts to which items are being expensed, and it was helpful for people in reading what is being expensed and to where. And I know it changed, and I know that there's been possibly a reason to change that, but I wondered and wanted to express my appreciation for having it with the expense accounts before the board approves the warrant.
Okay, thank you for your comment, Cheryl. Any other public comments on this, or can we vote on receiving the consent agenda? Go ahead, Marcia.
I know that Rod was saying he bought some new desks, and I was wondering that those aren't appearing, and I was just wondering if they were on the warrant. I haven't seen them.
They were on an earlier warrant.
They were for finance.
Okay.
Yeah, so to clarify, they're on an early warrant, though, for finance.
Those would also appear as a business card expense, Marcia. it wouldn't go directly to Uplift, which is the company we purchased them from.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So can I call the question on the consent agenda? Great. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Unanimous. All right. Next item on the agenda is the town manager report, the update on some significant happenings, and an opportunity for some questions. Rod, do you just want to, we have 10 minutes on this. Do you want to walk us in like maybe 5 minutes or so, walk us through some of the.
Sure. I want to try and be as quick as possible, but also draw your attention to a potential motion associated with actually DPW Director Chris Kaufman's department head report. So I'm not sure how many of you had a chance to read the packet, but in Chris Kaufman's monthly report, he illustrated the condition of lockers, clothing lockers for DPW staff, suggesting that they needed to be replaced, and provided a outline of a bid process that he went through to establish a competitive price for their replacement. And so I have a motion here that I'd like to identify as part of the process. I recognize that it's probably not the ideal situation, but I feel that with a little bit of background that we can get through that. So very quickly, as you might imagine, just like everybody else, Fielding and I are spending a lot of time plotting the impact of inflation on our operations. It's reasonable to say at this point that it's dramatically impacted the remainder of the FY22 budget, and it will dramatically impact the performance of the FY23 budget. Although we made significant provisions for inflation for FY23, in particular to do with fuel and anything that involves transportation, we were dramatically off. We don't know when or if the situation will return to a more normal setting, but we have experienced an increase of more than 50 cents a gallon for diesel and fuel within the space of a week. So we typically get deliveries about once a week for diesel at this point in the year. And we've had back-to-back deliveries, like the 2 days in a row, and the price increase is over 50 cents a gallon. So obviously we didn't predict that. I don't feel that we were ignoring anything. I don't think anybody necessarily predicted what was going to happen. Mostly it's, due to global conflict that we've all been reading about. However, as a business, as an operation, we're heavily dependent on fossil fuels to perform the functions that we do, and to get the materials and services delivered that we depend on. So we will be continuing to monitor that. A little bit later on, Fielding is going to present some financials here, which will graphically represent current situation with the budget, which is relatively secure, and demonstrate if you like, an experimental phase in sort of a dashboard style presentation for you to provide some feedback on. So other items relevant to what I just mentioned, we're in the process of renegotiating the Casella agreement. Casella is the waste hauler for the town of Norwich. It picks up material from the transfer station. This is a highly constrained area of activity for the hauler and for the town. They're the only major provider that we can utilize for the service. They're obviously deeply impacted by wage increases for drivers and operators, as well as diesel fuel and related costs. And so they'll be passing those costs on to us. We are gathering information right now on what the new agreement is likely to include. It expires April 4th of this year, after being extended for 1 year by my predecessor, Herb. I've already met with the representative from Casella, Jim Toa. We are in dialogue, I think is the safest way of saying it, about the particular conditions in the contract. And I think I should prepare you for the expectation that we will need to revisit the fee schedule for using the transfer station as a consequence of the new contract.
Is there any,
So-
Rob, sorry to interrupt, is there any is there any possible good outcomes as a result of the Casella conversations?
The Solid Waste Committee has reviewed the existing agreement and had discussions with people with a great deal of expertise and historical knowledge, including Neil Fulton. There are some suggestions at cost cutting that come with some questions that need to be thought through in terms of the operation of the transfer station and how effective that's going to be. And then there's an offer on the table from Casella to try and realize some cost savings around the food waste hauling aspect of the operation. But the question there is whether the people using the transfer station, the residents, would find that appropriate. So it would mean moving from small kind of human-sized totes to receive the food waste to a dumpster. And then the issue with the dumpster is A, getting the food in without getting it on you, B, getting it out when it's frozen and not landing on you and killing you, and then C, not having it as a bait for bear, which given the setting for the transfer station is a significant concern, and they're yet to find a satisfactory dumpster that cannot be flipped over by a bear. So for all these reasons, there's some reluctance to take this step, but there could be considerable cost savings associated with it. And so we're going through the bear designs, we're going through the leak issues, the odor issues, the rodent issues, and the human access to the dumpster issues before we make a decision.
Okay, thanks. I think, yeah, the complexity is interesting. So that's our fun trivia for the town manager's report. You can move on. Sorry.
That was discussed over lunch yesterday. So the IT process. I have received an updated list of existing computers and users for the town, and we have a budget that was set up for the replacement of the machines that we have. 13 or 14 of the 18 machines that we have, computers that we have. We will be placing an order with CCI very soon. The expectation is that they will prepare all 13 replacement computers at once, and then work through a phase of doing 4 or 5 in batches of 4 or 5, deploying them to the site and ensuring that they're functional. The one issue to identify is that because it's been more than 10 years since we replaced the computers, they come with 10-year-old monitors, and the change in technology of the monitors, including the cabling, has changed. So there may be some additional unexpected cost impacts associated with either adapting the old monitors to a new computer, which would be suboptimal, or replacing the monitors, which would be the preferable one. So I would expect in the next month that part of the project will be complete. They've also offered to update the fiber connections to the town in terms of pricing and capacity, and include EC Fiber as one of the potential vendors, so we can do a comparison and rectify some longer standing issues to do with security connections with the police department and the fire department and so forth. But DPW staffing, as you probably have noticed, there's been some discussion of these matters in various places. So there's a table attached to the back of my report that indicates the current staffing levels, and shows that currently we have an equipment operator position open. We have a building and grounds technician position open, and we have the half-time office assistant position open. Each of the open positions are currently being advertised, and we're dealing with applicants as they become available. The primary source of applicants at this point is online, coming from Indeed. Our advertisements on Indeed. We're not pulling anything necessarily from press or other sources. So that leaves the question of the replacement of the lockers for the DPW staff. And so if you can see the report from the DPW director demonstrating that the old lockers are too small and too rusty and no longer suitable, They are extraordinarily expensive, it seems to me, but I'm wondering if there's a possibility that somebody could move a motion and we can either discuss that now or move it to a different moment in the meeting.
So Rod, before we do anything else, your mic is like loud and the papers are shuffling and
So
like,
sorry.
at least two of us were grimacing, not because we were grimacing at the content, but because of the mics. So,
is that better?
No.
No. What about now?
I think it's better, maybe. All right, just so you know. Okay, so I think because it was in the report and it was outlined, I think it could be appropriate to accept a motion for that. Do you have a suggested motion that you would like to propose before the board?
Sure. A motion to approve the purchase of new lockers for the DPW crew from schoollockers.com in the amount of $5,343.44.
Okay.
So move.
Mary would like to make that motion. Okay, is there a second on that? Okay, Claudette seconded. Let's discuss the lockers. Go ahead, Claudette.
When I saw the pictures, it was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Definitely need to be replaced. They were disgusting.
Yes, the power of images. Okay, any other further discussion? Go ahead, Marcia.
So just to be clear, we now have 6 people who need lockers, and we're intending to have 8 people who need lockers.
Yes.
That's true. And are the 6 people that we have, are they new people? Are they older existing people, a mix of people?
The easiest way to answer the question is to refer you to the table that I just referenced. So, relatively speaking, they are all relatively new employees to the town. But there are 6 existing staff members, and we expect at least 2 more in the near future.
And so, if we're buying just 6 lockers, is that going to be enough? And you're recommending the most expensive ones. Is there a reason for that?
No, I believe we're actually recommending the cheapest.
I thought you said 5. Oh, there it is, 5,000. I was looking at the individual Salisbury ones for 6 lockers. Okay, so the question is, would that be enough?
Yes, because the DPW director and the office assistant are not likely to need lockers. So we have 6 operational staff that work odd hours and up to 16 hours at a time and get dirty when they do it. And so for them, coming in with wet boots and wet clothes, they need someone to hang their clothes and place their boots. But the office assistant and the manager are not expected necessarily to do that on a regular basis.
So, okay, so we're at time for this agenda item. So unless there's further discussion, I would like to call the question on this motion. Okay, I don't see Rob's face, but he'll pop up, I hope. There he is. All in favor of approving the purchase of these lockers, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you for including that in the report, and thank you for the images. Go ahead, Marcia, any questions for the town manager?
Yes, I just wanted to know, because especially with the increased costs of transportation, et cetera, have we already purchased the material that we're going to need for repair of roads in mud season?
So we had a contract that was organized in the fall, which is the typical time to do it. The stone and material is already delivered and is being stockpiled at the DPW garage. And with 2 new CDL operators, we can dispense it to the roads as needed. The contract calls for more than the materials that we have on hand, and it is delivered to the highway garage price. It's not variable on the basis of either the destination for the materials or the day-to-day price for fuel.
Okay.
Does that mean it's locked in?
Yeah, it's a locked in. It's a locked in price as delivered. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Go ahead, Claudette.
Yeah, Rod, do you happen, just because it's been front page Valley News on Sunday and I think yesterday, I know personally, my dirt road is in great shape. Had a lot to do with the rebuilding after 2017, but I'm wondering about the status of some of the other dirt roads. Are they as bad as Royalton and Thetford? Some of those roads like Gove Hill, I know, and
Right.
130 Beaver Meadow going into Thetford.
Right. I did a fairly extensive drive of the roads on Saturday morning when there were some calls made about the conditions on Turnpike. And I also drove Chapel Hill into Sharon and back again, and did the crossover between Norwich and surrounding towns. I obviously didn't have any problems getting around. We did some minor grading on Saturday. We've been doing minor grading and some adding of material as needed to roads when we get, either notice from the police department or from a resident. We don't have any roads closed currently. I understand that historically the upper section of Turnpike Road, the dirt section of Turnpike is commonly closed to all but local to residents. That hasn't occurred yet. I think that you're right. The 2017 storm repairs have put us in a really good situation relative to before and maybe to other towns. So we've not experienced necessarily the grim outcomes that other towns are grappling with. And I hope that for our sake that it stays that way. But I'm not sure how it's really going to play out. So,
Okay, quick follow-up, Claudette, go ahead.
Well, a quick follow-up and then just a couple more questions.
Okay, it's our time.
So for people coming into town or going up Turnpike Road, they can always do the upper Turnpike Needham bypass of that really bad section by Linda Cook's aunt's house. And her, right,
okay.
maybe less than a quarter of a mile once you hit the gravel pot. For some reason, there's a section there that is historically absolutely notorious.
Right, it's just really soft. Yeah, I don't know what it is.
You can always bypass that one.
Yeah.
So my other question is, sorry, I know we back in February when you had posted for a finance assistant, have we hired a finance assistant or are we still with Robert House?
Yeah.
We actually let me have Fielding answer that question because it's really good news. So there you go.
I am very happy to report that Lacey Milliken, our current temporary finance assistant, has signed her offer letter and will be officially an employee of the town of Norwich as of 4/4. So for the first time in 4 years, the finance office will be fully staffed. I'm
Yay.
very excited to report that.
Stuff like that.
And I have one other question, Roger.
Yeah, it's okay. Go
Just
ahead.
because it's been, the rumor mill is out there. The transfer station employee, the rumor that the transfer station employees are not getting a raise. Now, I went back and looked at the budget. And there is, I would imagine, just at least a cost of living increase. And I can't imagine that they would not get a cost of living increase. Is my assumption correct?
Yes. So the two staff that had anniversary dates between early January and last week have had their annual reviews and have had the recommendation that they receive their annual step increase consistent with the personnel policies, and they will subsequently receive a COLA increase on July 1, again consistent with the town's personnel policies. So, and there's one other employee whose his anniversary, I believe, is later in the year, closer to the midpoint of the year, closer to June or July, and the expectation is that will happen there too. We're very happy with the work of the transfer station staff, and things seem to be going well.
Thank you. I lied. I had one more question.
That's okay. I appreciated your last one, so you can ask another.
I believe our first report due to the the feds on ARPA spending, even though we haven't spent anything for ARPA, is due in April.
Yep.
And I believe even though we haven't spent anything, we must submit a
Yep.
report. I
Yep.
just
Yes.
want to, okay,
They know.
glad it's
They
on
know.
your radar. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
That's awesome. Thank you. Go ahead, Marcia, and then we're 10 minutes over and we have 2 public comments. I'm going to start doing this in our new year. Go ahead.
So I just wondered, I've been trying to watch the paper too, because I knew that there were all these openings and I wanted to see that we were advertising, but I think I only saw one advertisement in the Valley News. So I'm wondering, are we doing that?
Well, the positions have, I'll answer that, Rod, if I may. The positions have been filled, you know, the positions have been filled because they've been responsive to the one ad that was placed.
The one ad and all those people came from that one ad.
Do you
Well,
want to?
let me try and clarify. So as far back as Christmas time, we advertised for 2 equipment operator positions, and then subsequent to that, we advertised again. We basically refreshed the ad for 2 more equipment operator positions. We filled 2 equipment operator positions, and we filled 3 effectively, counting John McKinnon, who we advertised that position in December. So he took up his position in January, and then when 2 long-term employees resigned, effective earlier in, I think it was in the end of February, we advertised again. We interviewed. Those people have started work already as of this week.
Right.
There's 1 continuing opening for an equipment operator, and we continue to advertise for a office assistant. The initial ads always include the Valley News, but because of the expense of continuing to advertise in the Valley News, we then shift to maintaining our advertisements on Indeed.com and other virtual sites, which are cheaper. And we do better from those sites than we do from the printed newspaper in the first place. So we balance that off.
Right. Thank you for the greater history. All right. Are we good?
Mhm.
That was great. Thank you, Rob. All right, so I'll take 2 public comments. Just a reminder that public comments are comments. And so please try to phrase them as such. Cheryl Lindbergh, you are first.
Thank you, Roger. Cheryl Lindbergh, and I am making this comment as a lister. I would like to request of the town manager that departmental financial reports are provided monthly so we can see the breakdown of our departmental information. And I need to step off the meeting, so I couldn't hold off until this next conversation coming up. But I did want to make that request to receive some monthly financial detail reports for like the lister's office.
Okay, great.
I think that the presentation from Fielding should address those issues for you.
Yeah. Rod, we're commenting only. We're commenting only. Go ahead. Thank you, Cheryl. Pam Smith, you are next.
Thank you, Roger. Pam Smith, 1445 New Boston Road. Back on the topic of the condition of the dirt roads, I bottomed out on our road today. Granted, I was driving the Honda CRV, not our SUV, but I bottomed out and it was pretty scary. So I have put in a request to Chris to put some attention to our road. But we also took our SUV and went up Turnpike this evening to run an errand, and it's pretty bad. So hopefully the DPW crew will start putting that material out on the roads pretty soon.
Okay, thank you, Pam.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda seamlessly into financials. Rod, do you want to, should I turn to Fielding? Or, okay, so I'm going to turn directly to Fielding. Obviously, Rod queued you up a little bit, Fielding, with the discussion of the inflation. And there were some of that details in his report. So what do you have for us?
Thanks, Roger, and thanks, Rod, for teeing me up. I hope you all had a chance to look at the monthly financials that were presented in the packet. That does represent 2/3 of our fiscal year. And when you take into account, guaranteed future expenditures, the second half of the monetary articles would be the largest portion of which we're sitting right at about 68% performance to budget, which means we've spent 68% of our budget, which is just over 2/3. That's where I would expect us to be coming out of the winter season. Winter season is our largest payroll load. It's also one of our largest expense loads, primarily due to the demands placed on DPW. With overtime for plowing, salt, chemicals, sand, all of those expenses hit hard in the winter months. So I do feel that we are right on pace in terms of where you would see yourself in a normal year in terms of expenditures. That being said, I did want to touch base on the inflation situation that we, as I'm sure everyone on this call has experienced in some way, shape, or form. Definitely in recent history, but has seen that ramp up over the last year. The CPI index, as of March 3rd, had us at 7.9% for year on year. As we know, notably gas prices since March 3rd have rapidly increased due to several situations going on in foreign policy primarily. So I would expect next month's number to be closer to 10. If I was to place a bet, that's where I would expect it to be, in the upper 8s, 9% range, that kind of thing. And so what does that mean for us? I think the big thing to point out is that for the remainder of the year, we are going to really see this inflationary pressure, in everything that we buy, primarily fuel. That's probably been the biggest overall percentage increase, but you're going to see that in all the way down to shipping stuff for office supplies to Tracy Hall, and everything in between. So it's something we're actively trying to manage. I have reached out to all of our department heads to submit a list of their major expenditures that they foresee still to come for the year. And we're starting a process of ensuring that our critical needs are met. Where can I hesitate to say savings, because everything's going to be more expensive, but we're trying to use our remaining funds as effectively and as efficiently as possible. So we're working diligently and attentively on that matter. I would expect, to kind of plant the seed, or to throw water on the seed, I guess I should say at this point, this to continue into fiscal year 23. And we are working with our department heads to ensure that this isn't just a one-time exercise, that they are looking along in the medium term, I would say.
So Fielding, if I can interrupt you, just because I think board members need to sort of maybe understand the polemic. At what point do you do more? What is some of the triggers to go beyond monitoring? Would you say when we start to see the reporting sort of exceed even predictable expenses?
That's certainly one, more drastic action gets taken, the worse our performance gets. And with that, I'm going to use that somewhat as a segue into, and I can't share my screen. I don't know if you can turn that on real quick.
I just did.
For me. Okay, thanks. To our new financial dashboard. Now, this is just a rough draft. It's something I've kind of been playing with this week. But this hopefully provides at a quick glance, how we're performing for the year. And so you can see we have our overall budget performance, our payroll budget performance, our expense budget performance, and our revenue budget performance, both in a visual sense with the pie charts, as well as kind of our actual hard numbers. And then I have that broken out by department. And the way this works is blue is the current month's expenditures, red represents the year to date, and then what we have left to spend would be in the green. I did want to highlight again, just real quickly, this doesn't include our monetary articles and kind of guaranteed expenditures that we're going to have. But so when I mentioned we're at 68%, I'm referencing that money as if it's been spent already, although it hadn't as of the end of February. So I did want you guys to take a look at this. This will be, this is a work in progress, but I think it is a really nice visual tool for not only you as the board, but also our department heads, our staff, and the public to get a very quick but easy to read look at how the town is performing financially. So to answer your question, Roger, I think, once we see these numbers getting worse and worse in terms of, if we were at 75% through the end of February, that would trigger certain things. We would really be pulling back in terms of our expenditures. We would be making hard decisions in terms of, what do we have left to purchase? What do we have left to purchase this year? What can we get by with? What can we get by without, I should say. And so, that's a big one. Right now, we're still okay, and we do have, some things working in our favor. I will say that our payroll expenses are only at 61%, and that doesn't have, that shows some savings, and that's helping us out. So we do have a little bit of a cushion there, although we are getting more and more, more hiring is happening, and we're having some good success with that, but we have been able to capture some savings, without having a DPW director for 6 months, without having at the time, a town manager, but now a zoning director or a planning and zoning director. Those are savings that we're utilizing to manage our budget currently. So we have some situations that are working in our favor there.
Yeah, cold comfort in a way. Okay, so what we have another big sort of part of this agenda item, which is the response to the audit. So I'm going to ask board members if they have any questions about anything that Fielding has said, anything about this dashboard, to quickly work our way through this, because it should be a great tool that is self-evident, right? But Marcia, you had a question.
Yeah, I think the tool is great. And the question is globally for the board. I think the writing on the wall is that everything is not going to be okay. And we're going to have some pretty severe problems. So in terms of the world. And in that light, I think that the kind of hard decisions and planning that Fielding was talking about should be something that we start talking to department heads about now. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, I'd like to keep remembering that money that's budgeted for certain things should be used for those things, so that we shouldn't be thinking of it like we've saved money and we've got a slush fund for stuff. If we don't have a full complement of staff in DPW, but we need to pay more for fuel, then okay, maybe that's in the DPW budget, but I would have a hard time saying we've budgeted X number of dollars for things in another department that we haven't filled, and we're just going to use that money somewhere else. And we do now also have our emergency funds, which is good, but I think we have to be pragmatic about what's happening in the world and get prepared.
Yeah, thanks, Marcia. I think that's a good reflection of what we've just heard a little bit, for sure. And then I won't take too much time to dive into it, but the master financial policies talks about what terms in which a line item transfer is appropriate. Okay, that's great. Any other comments on this? Claudette, I'm going to actually, I'll take some time to invite if you have any sort of reactions to this dashboard. This has been something you've talked about for a long time wanting. Does this meet some of your personal expectations as someone who's championed this cause?
It does. And but what I guess I would like to see, Fielding, can you scroll down a little bit more to the bars?
Certainly.
So when I look at, I guess what this is, and this is an answer to my question. Okay, which departments are way over budget, and the whys is part of what I would like to hear in the future.
Okay.
But this bar graph actually shows me which of those departments are over the 66%. And I know just based on our workings as a board within this fiscal year, why finance is over and why the town manager's office is over.
Right.
But if in future, if you have that information, that would be helpful, or just to state the why they are.
Okay.
For the general public primarily, I guess.
Okay, great. That's good feedback. Okay.
Okay.
Anything else on the dashboard and sort of the status of where we are in this month, in this moment? Because if not, I'm going to go ahead. Mary, do you want to, you have a comment? Oh, you're mute. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Just appreciation. I think it's going to work really well. It's nice and clear. And it's certainly, I think the visuals are very helpful,
Yeah.
the imagery. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, much appreciation. Okay, so we're good on this section. So I'm going to ask Fielding to stop sharing his screen, and I'm looking for Rod to nod that we can transition to the sort of response to audit. We had a report from our auditor, and Fielding and Rod just want to talk to us a little bit about a response with us to that. So go ahead.
Okay, let me open it up. So as you might imagine, Fielding and I were working with Bonnie Batchelder, our auditor, in leading up to the audit, and we have gone over the audit report in some detail. I think if you have questions about the details, Fielding has some information there that we can share. I don't necessarily want to bulk down in a line by line treatment, but I want to say that after speaking with other people in the municipal government in Vermont, I think it's fair to characterize our audit from Bonnie as being on the lighter side. And in light of the fact that we've had so much change in the finance department in the last 4 years, and the complexity of some of our practices, we feel it's really important now to immediately work on developing an RFP to go back out and establish a contract with a new auditor. I should remind you, I'm sorry I overlooked this part, we had a 1-year extension on a contract with Bonnie, and that's been completed with this audit. So we're not under contract with Batchelder Associates anymore. We need to find a new auditor. We would like to set up an RFP or RFQ process and start reviewing responses to that as soon as possible. And what we would be looking for is a firm that can offer a really stringent or rigorous read of our books and provide supportive advice to the board and to me and the finance director in the form of management advice as to how to structure the charter of accounts and how to improve the policies that we work with, as well as the mechanics, if you like, of of operating in the NIMRIC environment and doing municipal finance. So in particular, what I'd like to propose is that this RFP is flexible enough to seek services from an appropriate firm that could provide consultant advice on elements of redrafting the existing master financial policy. And again, I'll hand it over to Fielding to go into a little more detail on this topic. I think that the key issues that I just want to outline here are that given that both of us are relatively new to the position, we've turned to the master financial policy repeatedly looking for guidance on how we should do things and when we should do things, and it's absent. And so what we would say in general is that the definition of the role of the town manager and the finance director vis-a-vis the treasurer and other issues to do with the way our system is organized, the policy is silent on those, and that leaves us in this difficult situation frequently where we're having to employ best practices as we know them or understand them, but actually not have the support of being able to cite a particular page and paragraph in the policy to explain to people we're following policy, here it is. So on that note, I want to hand it over to Fielding, and he'll give you a couple of examples of the shortcomings of the existing financial policy, just to demonstrate that I think what we're asking for here is your acknowledgement that it's the appropriate time to go out for with an RFP for a new auditor and extend that request so that it includes receiving professional advice on the matters of financial policy. So take it away, Fielding.
Thanks, Rod. Yeah, I think the biggest thing, just to emphasize, right at the start is an audit is required of us on an annual basis, and currently we are not under contract with any auditor as of right now. So it is something that I think, regardless of any form of opinion, is something we need to do no matter what. So just to highlight that, to extend, I think Rod did a very good job of presenting our concerns and our reasoning. To provide an example of our financial policies, I would like to point out kind of our tax collection and the lack thereof of any real policy that goes into any sort of detail in terms of, obviously we have dates that taxes are required to be collected by, but in what I find to be a relatively unique facet of Norwich tax collection, we do have a substantial level of overpayments that occur. And a large part of that has been, which coming from Wyoming is kind of just something I never thought I would encounter, but here we are. And so it leaves me in a position where we don't have any sort of policy to dictate exactly how that is done. And so in the past, prior to my start, it's been on kind of a case-by-case or a one-off basis where the individual taxpayers called. They are then given an option of what they'd like to do with it. Would they like to pay it forward towards their next year's taxes? Would they like a refund? If the issue seems to have come from when they pay it forward or asked for it to be credited towards next year's balance, they then receive next year's bill 4 or 5 months later, and then pay the full amount again and don't take their credit. And so we're left in the same situation where I'm, the finance person is calling and asking what they'd like to do with it. They'd like to pay it forward. And then we're left with this cycle. And what I discovered, it goes back in some cases 4 or 5 years, which creates this administrative load, one, but two, it creates this overpayment issue that we we don't actually have a policy to dictate. My practice that I would recommend would be to just immediately issue a refund of that overpayment to the taxpayer once the second half collection has been completed. That would be my suggestion. However, we don't have that written in a policy. So it's, there's little to guide, I guess, in terms of what exactly needs to happen or what the town has decided should happen in this situation. So that's just one example of our policies that I do think we should, you know, in a general sense, we really need to put some time and effort into looking at them, analyzing them, and expanding upon them to include not only just these specific situations of tax collection and everything else that could go with that. What do we do for delinquencies? When do we trigger further action? There's just another example. I think we have some room to grow in terms of an outline of responsibilities within finance, the town manager, the elected officials, the finance director, and what roles fall to whom, and have that be dictated in a policy versus collection of job descriptions. I think that would be beneficial as another example. So I do think that would prove to be very beneficial, and where you're going to see fruits of that labor are in future audits. As we create a more robust and substantial policy structure, that leaves less room for error to happen. And so I do think that's where you'll see the fruits of that labor is in future audits.
Okay, thank you, Fielding. I just want to say one thing for the benefit of like historical context. So when we wrote the master financial policies, which was not that long ago, believe it or not, I remember it was really Mary, Claudette, and I who one summer with the prior town manager. And Linda Cook started it, right? But I remember the previous board, but I remember very specifically sitting in the small conference room, us three, to work from previous work. Thank you for acknowledging that, Mary, and model policies. And one of the big things that I think Claudette and I particularly shared is sort of this tension that I'm seeing between what was characterized by former administration as procedures and not necessarily needing to codify procedures. And that was the prerogative of whoever was in sort of these roles. I like to think that Claudette and I, and then Mary and everyone who worked on these had the wisdom to know that not having these sort of procedural policy matters, such as, you know, relationships and certain processes, not having them written down causes possible vulnerabilities to operations subsequently, like later on. So I want to say that by way of, for Marcia and Rob, who might not necessarily have the context of some of the, you know, the sort of the tensions that I think we wanted to, not the tensions, but things that we wanted sort of more procedural matters codified in policy, but we were advised not to proceed in that way. And I think what I'm hearing is that some of it should be. Claudette, do you want to have a follow-up? And then Marcia, I know you had your hand up.
We weren't advised. He frankly said no.
Okay, yes. Yes. Okay.
Let's be clear.
All right. I'm trying to be diplomatic. All right. Yes. Mary. Oh, sorry. No, I had. Do you want to have a follow up to that point, and then I'll go to Marcia, or was that what your comment was?
I'll go after Marcia.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Marcia.
Sorry. I agree. We need to have procedures, and I think they should be codified in that way. I'm not so sure that an auditor is the person who should be doing that in terms of dictating anything. I think, you know, we spent some time, even since I've been on the board, going through these policies, and we were definitely following the model rules that were put out by Vermont VLTC. And so I think that some additional expertise might be good, but I'm not sure that that's the right person to do it. And in terms of an auditor being new, I don't know if that's what everybody thinks is required. The suggestion that I heard from the existing auditor was that she needed to get things earlier from our administrative offices, and that's what was making things delayed. But I also think that I've heard that in the past, and so I don't know, because I don't have that much depth. And I don't want to forget this, so I'm going to go back because I wanted to bring it up in Rod's town manager report. In terms of purchases of laptops and things, I'm kind of worried about IT in terms of both sustainability and suitability. And so I'd like to see an inventory of machines that we've got associated with individuals and an assessment of the suitability. You know, who needs a laptop versus a workstation? The world has kind of changed, and a replacement schedule to ensure that we have a staggered expense on that point. Because even those are going to be hard to get if things go really pear-shaped.
So Rod, can you sort of make note of that for possible future follow-up? Because I want to get back to so Rod's writing that down. Thank you, Marcia. I want to get back to your points, which I'll take after Mary asks her question, because I think they're a good ones. So Mary, do you have a question or comment? And then we'll come back to Marcia.
Yeah, I have a comment and a question. So Linda Cook and I had the initial stab at trying to get together the master financial policies. And before we started, there was no master financial policy. There were scattered policies, and they were from many different years. So our initial effort was just to make an umbrella. And we recognized that it would kind of be the type of thing where, you know, one subsequent select board member said, oh, we can bolt things on, you know, or we might have to go through and improve or coordinate. I also think we, as a framework, we used a VLCT template, which I think subsequently learned was a kind of a framework from a little town in Pennsylvania. And sometimes I think the VLCT guidance is a little bit kind of like general. So there might be a much better template. There might be one also that is more clear about Vermont statute and how the framework should work under statute. And also that I do agree with Marcia that maybe keeping the audit portion of what we're asking for distinct from this improvement that we have in the master financial policies might be wise. And that I would want the consulting on the master financial policies to be with a firm that knows about Vermont statute, because I think it's really important in this state for that to be clear. So, right. Yeah.
So I think this, okay, Claudette, go ahead, because yeah, our professionals are raising their Zoom hands. They're ready to chat.
Going back to one of the original questions, yes, I think we need to go out on with an RFP for a new auditor, without a doubt. We've had, what I have found over the last, I can't remember how long we've had Bonnie, but the first year was great. The second year was not. The third year was not. The fourth year was horrible. In terms of delivery of product. So yeah. It's time to move on. And I also heard that the auditors actually at some point in time get audited themselves by other firms. And I don't know if we can put a request in that this firm be audited by another auditor. I don't know. I don't even know where we would go with that. And yeah. For the answer to who's the best person to provide us with guidance on the model policies, I would defer to somebody that would. I don't know, but the state, the people that are recommended to provide municipal audits have to be well aware of Vermont statute.
Right. So, so Rod wants to respond, but I just want to say that Rod kept using the word firm. So, you know what? I'm not going to introduce it. Go ahead, Rod. Because I agree with these other folks that we don't necessarily want our auditor giving us advice on our master financial policies, but we could see the benefit of a firm that has both capabilities, right? So go ahead.
So let me clarify. I appreciate the feedback. So a large enough firm will have both auditors, that individuals who are responsible for the audit, but then also CPAs, accountants that can give advice on a range of policy issues, on a range of questions around the structure of the accounts and responsibility. And I guess what I was imagining, either we would do 2 separate RFPs or develop an RFP that clearly sought to have a large enough firm that wouldn't just have an auditor, but they could also provide us feedback. They would be separate people, and they would need to be separate people because you could set up this potential conflict of interest, right? So between the advisor and the auditor. So, but there are firms that provide both services, as part of a larger organization, and they have separate units that would do that. And any firm that we would want to choose, we would want to make sure had considerable experience working in Vermont municipal settings, up to and including some level of familiarity with NIMRIC. So, so I think that it may be 2 different, maybe 2 different organizations, or maybe a large enough company that can do both. My understanding is that those larger companies exist. And I think that the other key thing that I'd be looking for here, through our network, if you like, informally as well as maybe formally, is to actually seek out people who can recommend really good firms, not just for the auditor function, or not so much for the auditor function, but particularly for giving advice on how to structure the policy and how to structure our accounts and how to operate day to day, because they are 2 really distinctly different things. And we would want the delivery of that advice part to happen before we do the audit, acknowledging that we're not likely to make really big changes until the audit happens. And then just to make sure that everybody knows, obviously, Fielding and I are very eager to make sure that we can hand off the necessary materials to the auditor as soon as possible after the end of the FY22 financial year. And so that's absolutely critical for us. And we weren't in a great situation for lots of complicated reasons, and we did not have good feedback from the auditor that we had on what information they had. And there were long delays in our provision of information and their response. So I want to make it really clear that there was very little on our end that we could do except wait. And that was problematic for us in the extreme. Okay, so I just want to be really clear. The advice and the input is really important. Maybe we can bring this down to a question of, if you're okay with us developing a draft RFP, Fielding and I will start work on that, as soon as possible.
I think there's some nods, but I just want to say that we're half hour over our agenda right now. So I want to get back to that specific question and get a sense of that. But Fielding, do you have anything to add, knowing that we're a half hour over?
I think conversation has naturally kind of flowed since I raised my hand, and we've touched base on that the firm would definitely be separate in terms of the consultant for financial policies and the actual auditor. We've discussed kind of the shortcomings that we witnessed with the audit, notably on the delay side. And so I think Rod has summarized it nicely, so I'll leave it with that. So.
Go ahead, Claudette.
So for those, and I'm sure there will be critics out there that say, well, why do you need to get another consultant piece?
Yeah.
This is a $5 million budget. We need to be fiscally responsible. If we do not have the policies set in place and the procedures set in place, it is incumbent on us to get there.
Right.
And if we need to spend money to save money, I'm all for it. So that is my response to the critics that I'm sure are gonna.
Right. Well, we
raise
want
their
to
issues.
we want a strong work product, and we want to be responsive, arguably in a way that we were not in prior years following the BEC scam, perhaps because we weren't in a position personnel wise to get what we needed or wanted. And so we could say this was actually a longstanding ask in many ways.
So
Marcia,
may I say one more thing?
please, yes, go ahead.
Whether or not it's an RFP for the consulting services or an RFQ to look for both, or an RFP and an RFQ, either way, I'm go for it, is my response.
I want to talk about the possible financing of that after I take Marcia's question, or maybe actually, we'll come back to Rod a little bit on that. And go ahead, Marcia.
I agree. I think that we need to make sure this is right. I would like to see the RFP or the RFQ before it goes anywhere.
Sure. Yeah. Rod, just because I don't want to necessarily set up a practice where we necessarily need to review every RFP or RFQ that we authorize, but I think in this instance, I think it would be helpful for the benefit of clarity if we could just get a sense of that through a potential draft form. And then when do you have a quick timeline on something like that and your anticipated financing, or do you not want to comment right now just yet?
Just really quickly, I would expect something within a month to 6 weeks for consideration by the board, and then it could go out. And so because we wouldn't necessarily incur any expenses until the FY23 year on the auditor themselves, the timing is not that critical. The question of the consultant and when the consultant would start is a more tender kind of question, if you like, and that could be separated out. And again, I wouldn't expect them to be charging for services until the new financial year. And then we've got, we always have to do an audit. We would expect the audit that we would get to be much more expensive than the last year's audit. So I think that the board should prepare themselves mentally for a much more expensive audit in the order of, 40 or 50% more at least. And so there's that question. And then the question of the consulting fees, if there are some, if that's the route that we go, then that could be attended to by the study fund that we've established through the last town meeting, or, we can look at that.
Okay, that's great. And we have some questions, and just for the benefit of timeline, we would want a report from that new auditor, a preliminary report, probably in October 26th, let's say, our second meeting in October. We know that we close out the fiscal year in the second meeting in August, right? So, and then we know that this RFP is gonna come before us in about 4 to 6 weeks. So the timeline, things are gonna move very quickly, potentially, from this work. Marcia, and then Mary, and then we should move on if that's okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it would seem to me that the consulting work would be time limited. It's not somebody that's going to go and hold our hand for a long time. So that should be doable.
Right. Particularly given the dates that I just spouted out like a crazy person. Go ahead, Mary.
I'm also interested to know if there is a template out there, or at least a partial framework from some other community that a consultant would know about. So it's not a thing of reinventing the wheel or customizing Norwich to the extent that consultant would be running on and on and on to get it done. So
Right. We don't want that from recent history. We want a very focused.
I want it from any history.
That's ding, ding, ding. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Sorry. Right. Okay. Are we good? Are we good on this agenda item, Rod?
Yeah.
And Julie? Okay.
Well, I think it's wonderful that it was brought up.
Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation. Thank you for everyone's intelligence on this. All right. So why don't we renew some liquor licenses? We seek to be ourselves or seek to be someone different for a little bit. Do you want to begin that motion, Claudette? Go ahead.
I move to recess the select board meeting.
I second.
Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you, unanimous.
I move to convene as the Norwich Liquor Commission.
Okay, is there a second?
I second.
I saw Marcia's hand first. So
Okay.
made by Claudia, seconded by Marcia. Thank you. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, thank you.
Want me to keep going?
Yeah, can you begin? Let's begin with a motion.
I move to approve liquor license applications for Fraser's General Store, Inc., doing business as Dan and Wits, L'Enfant Vert LLC, doing business as Carpenter and Main Restaurant, Green Visions LLC, doing business as the Norwich Inn, and King Arthur Flour.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, seconded by Mary, I think I saw. Claudette, Mary. For discussion, Bonnie emailed us, or Miranda via Bonnie provided us the applications in our email. This has been the longstanding ones for a while. So unless there's any further discussion, I'm happy to call the question.
Seems pretty straightforward.
Yes, mercifully. All right, then all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Was that truly?
I move to close the Norwich Liquor Commission session and reconvene as the select board.
Is there a second? Okay, seconded by Mary. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. We are ourselves. So Rod, the wastewater feasibility study engineering services agreement, I thought the memo provided by Rod was very clear, referencing the history on this. This was supporting a town plan action item. We are the folks who authorize contracts, and that's why it's before us today. Any questions? Why don't I begin with a motion? There's two, let's begin with the first motion, and then we'll get into discussion. Right?
All right, I'll do it.
Thank you, Mary.
I move to approve the town manager signing on behalf of the town an engineering services agreement, ESA, with Dufresne Group for a wastewater feasibility study for the village and adjacent areas in the amount of $98,000.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, seconded by Claudette. Okay, Rod, why don't you discuss this first to explain how it's not necessarily $98,000 would be a good place to begin, just because of the motion doesn't necessarily provide that clarity, and then we'll go into board discussion. Does that make sense?
Sure. So there's probably slang terms I can use to explain this that might make more sense, but I'm going to try and keep it above board. So the on-paper cost of the study is $98,000. The loan application, which is for a revolving loan fund, is also for $98,000. Those two things match. The current operation of the loan fund program gives municipalities doing studies such as this 100% forgiveness. So the consulting team will receive $98,000. They'll receive it from the state pass through the town. So they'll submit invoices, assuming that we go with this program, assuming for the sake of discussion that you agree to this, then the consultants will invoice us on a monthly basis or near monthly basis. The town will pay, then the town will be reimbursed by the state. And so up to $98,000. So the fund loan, the loan application is equal in amount to the cost of the study. The loan is 100% forgiven by the state. So the total cost borne by the town is zero.
Okay.
Right?
Thank you for that clarity. Okay. Any questions or discussions on the memo and the materials? Claudette?
Sorry, Rod, this 100% forgiveness. So it's forgiven regardless of if we go any further than,
Yes, there are
even if
no,
we do not provide a
Right.
wastewater treatment facility or anything else, it's
right.
100% forgiven, period, the end.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to know.
Mary was next and then Marcia.
What is likely to be like the cash flow scenario? In other words, will the state reimburse monthly? Do you have any, maybe you have experience with other towns, or would they, let it go all the way to the end? And then we have, no? Okay, because I was thinking with all our talk of inflation and costs and, really keeping an eye on things, that if it came as one big hit, I think it would be difficult.
I would very much like to avoid it coming as one big hit. My expectation would be that there'll be three, I think at least a minimum of three payment periods. And so the period of time that they're going to be doing this study is in the range of 6 to 7 months. So it won't be every month, but it will be pretty close to every 2 months. And we can cover, the invoice for 60 days before the state reimburses for sure. So once you divide $100,000 by 3, $33,000 a piece, maybe worst case scenario. Yes, we can cover that. That won't be a cash flow problem for us.
Huge disruption. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Great, thanks. Marcia?
I went to the DEC website to read up about this, and it says that the loans involve delayed payments, repayments. So that's of concern to me. But moreover, I'm concerned because it's 3 times the size of the original estimate. And, again, we haven't asked the voters for this money, and I'm worried about that, even though we're supposed to get it repaid. The fact sheet also says that the applications are due in the winter each year, so I'm wondering why we're doing it now. And then there's a really nice workbook for community leaders, which talks about how you should do this, which includes establishing a town planning fund that allows us to match state grant funds. The typical stuff about forming a community vision, finding everything that people want. And I guess it all boils down to me, because after all of that, then you're supposed to get an engineer consultant and obtain the funds. So I'm worried about whether or not we're skipping that community involvement. And I'm not entirely sure how we take an engineer and say, we want to look into this, but we don't have any decisions yet, which the state says we should do, about the size and scope of what the village needs. So, are we looking for an X size, or are we looking for the economy size? I don't know. And the bottom line for me is the loan application in the packet is incomplete, and the board shouldn't be voting to sign something that's blank. For example, questions on pending litigation in excess of $10,000. When all that groundwork has been done and we have the answers to these other questions, then maybe we could consider it, but I think this is premature.
So Rod, on a very, very high level, for the sake of having the public having an answer to the board, Marcia's questions, can you please recharacterize why this study was recommended to us with the Planning Commission, and then briefly characterize what a pre-engineering wastewater study is for us?
Right. So yes, the Planning Commission recommended to the Select Board that the town should pursue such a study, and they did that on the basis of work that they did as part of the town plan. The town plan contains policies that actually ask for a study to be undertaken. So the question of whether the community has discussed it or not can be answered in the affirmative. The Select Board previously approved pursuing this up to and including issuing an RFQ, which we undertook in good faith and have retained, and have arrived at a decision where we have entered into contract negotiations with a particular vendor. This draft contract that's contained in the packet is something that's also been reviewed by the very unit that would make the funding available to undertake the study, and the agreement has been approved pre-approved, so that if the town tonight decides to pursue going into a contract with the frame group, then this contract passes the test from DEC, the funding entity. Lastly, the question of the information that Marsh has been reading, I believe that there's more than one source of information on the web from DEC, including the handbook, and that the terms in the deal offered here reference the annual plan, the so-called intended use plan, where you see a link from in my memo, and the details of that plan, which are accepted in the packet, make clear that for a feasibility study and pre-engineering study, which is the way I would characterize this study, there is 100% forgiveness for municipalities up to a certain limit, and this study is well within that limit. And then lastly, there are many questions that are in the fund application form that are not answered because that information is not necessarily needed to be in the public domain. And so it would be a question of you entrusting the completion of the form, now that you know the scope of those questions, to me and the finance director to answer those questions in detail. But there would be, I think, and it's an argument that I am making here, that the answering of all those questions and making it a public document would prejudice the town's position in legal proceedings and any other negotiations subsequent to this. And it would be equivalent to, an individual being asked to show their, loan application form for a mortgage. It's not something that's generally in the public domain. So I think that the questions about the community study and so forth, this we've arrived at the point where the study is the next step in the process.
Okay, that's great. So I just want to, I'll take your last comment, Marcia, because we do have a motion on the table. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think actually, Rod, it would be available to people through the Freedom of Information Act from the state. So I don't think that that's a valid argument. Do you know what size of development is intended? Because what are we telling these folks we want? And I'm wondering, in the application, you said that it was also for the Marion Cross School. So I'm just wondering if that's duplication of effort, because I know that the school district, which is a separate municipality, is doing their own work. And so how does this blur in terms of asking for wastewater study money for the town for a size I don't know anybody has told us what size, and for a municipality school that's also doing their own thing?
So again, these questions have been asked and answered in a previous process, but for the benefit of the public having an answer to your question, Marcia, Rod, can you please characterize in a pre-engineering study how Marion Cross, as a stakeholder of in the village district, how their prior work may or may not interact with this work? Can you answer that question? I believe that.
Yeah. So to be clear, no individual project is being proposed. No individual project is being investigated. It's a feasibility study. The first and most important thing here is to actually establish what current conditions with regard to wastewater are in the village and adjacent areas, and then explore options further and identify what, if any, responses may be warranted on the basis of the information that's derived from fieldwork, extensive fieldwork. The question of the Marion Cross School, it's well established that the Marion Cross School has had a long-standing issue with wastewater. The engineers were aware of Marion Cross's circumstances and Marion Cross's, the school district's, previous efforts at resolving the issue. And the Marion Cross School Board has made it clear that they regard themselves as key stakeholders in the process. So they'll be engaged with directly and be part of the study as any other stakeholder would. And the study will proceed to come up with recommendations or arrive at a set of suggested strategies that could address that. That's the separate municipal nature of the school board doesn't really bear down on this. They're aware of the study. We're aware of them. We expect them to participate meaningfully in the process, and I think they're looking forward to it.
Okay. Any other points? Go ahead, Claudette.
Yeah, I just want to comment that the school board is looking forward to the result of this feasibility study. It's in the public record on the school board side.
Yeah. Okay, so without further discussion, I'll call the question if that's okay, because I believe we have a motion on the table. Miranda hasn't gestured. Okay, we still have one. All right, so all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, I'm going to roll call. Claudette, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mary, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Marcia, how do you vote?
Vote no.
Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm a yes. All right. Is that good on that agenda item?
No, I think there's part two.
There is a part two. That's what I thought. Go ahead.
I move to approve the town manager signing on behalf of the town a Vermont Water and Wastewater Revolving Loan Fund funding application to cover the cost of the wastewater feasibility study for the village and adjacent areas in the amount of $98,000.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. I think we discussed this as part of the prior motion, so I'm going to call the question if that's okay. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, sorry. Roll call. Claudette, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Marcia? Marcia, I didn't hear.
Sorry. Sorry. No.
Okay. Rob?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm a yes. All right. Now I think we're done. There was two parts. Yep.
Yes, we are.
Thank you very much. That's thank you. We have our break now, right? We should take let's take 5 minutes because we're over. So well, how about so 8:12. See you then.
That's good.
Okay, resuming the 23rd select board meeting, March 23rd select board meeting at 8:12. All right, so the next item on the agenda is the face covering rule extension versus suspension. Essentially, it's set to expire on the 25th. And so we are here to discuss it. Rod provided a memo of some high-level information. My takeaway of that high-level information was our policy is our face covering rule references a data metric that has a data metric previously that was previously sort of the main prerogative for measurement by the CDC, and since then there's been new measurements introduced, to broadly paraphrase it. And so that's the consideration before us. Go ahead, Claudette.
I can't remember when Governor Scott put this or approved this. It automatically statewide expires April something.
27th, I think. End of April.
Yeah. So I have a couple of concerns. If we move to extend, we'll be the outliers in the general area.
Yeah.
But there's still the unknown with the new Omicron variant. So I'm truly here. I don't know what the best solution would be other than having it left as a personal decision after the 26th. I looked again on the CDC website, and as Rod pointed out in his memo, the information is not updated until Thursday. We were still in the moderate range in Windsor County of transmission, although, looking at hospitalizations now, I think is I know that's what the CDC is looking at. It's not what I would personally look at for a metric, but that's all we got. So, so I don't know what the answer is.
Go ahead, Mary.
I've been going back and forth on it. My gut reaction is to not renew it, to let it lapse and to let people, take personal responsibility. Still think there are a lot of unknowns. I hear that the new variant is way more infectious, especially for people who have not been vaccinated, but perhaps it has somewhat milder symptoms. But I'm inclined to drop it and let this be a matter of personal responsibility. And I'd also came to the meeting hoping other people would have more of a sense of direction on it, because I feel torn about it. And, we've been through so much, and if you do drop it, are we kind of not helping out the people who can't get vaccinated, for instance, of whom they're, little kids and people with who don't, whose bodies reject shots, things like that. So immunocompromised people. So there's still a lot to the decision, but I'm kind of inclined to just let it lapse, but I'd love to hear from others.
Marcia?
Yeah, I agree. I think letting it lapse is the thing to do, because the weight of authority is kind of against us, and that could change in an instant. And if it does, then we can change. But right now, I think we're not going to change people's behavior. We haven't necessarily. And so I think we kind of have to follow what the state and the weight of authority in the area is doing. And certainly the college, the co-op, they've dropped them.
Rob, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's the same sort of struggle in my mind, but I'm in a variety of places, airports. I just flew through airports, and fortunately everyone was masked. On the airplane ride, there weren't any fights breaking out, but it's increasingly difficult to enforce, and given the way that the rest of the state is going, I would say we let it lapse.
So the feeling I thought I had was it's interesting that we had a provision that was linked to data in our policy, and then the data metrics changed. Isn't that just sort of that's just the world order, right? Trust science until science is different. So I guess what I would say is what I was really proud of with Norwich is it wasn't just the power of the mandate. With the mandate came signage. We provided signage, and I saw that signage, in other places. I saw it at the Montshire Museum, I saw it at Blue Sparrow, and I saw it at the library. The town provided signage. I thus saw town provided messaging. I saw with that the willingness of places to hand out masks, right? And so my concern is that once a mandate goes away, the messaging is it's over, not be cautious, which, as Claudette was alluding to, might be a little more appropriate, be cautious rather than it's over. So then the signage comes down, the masks don't get handed out, and that's unfortunate. So I guess I think the weight of authority is like a good paraphrasing of, why be a little bubble here. I think that is convincing in some ways, but I do think that we can still issue messaging and signage that is more about, while no mandate, there may or may not be, there might be a recommendation, and we can certainly require, if employees in Tracy Hall want it, that can certainly be a different kind of mandate as well. So that's what I got. I'm proud of what we did with our mandate, I guess is my point, with signage and messaging and what came from that. Go ahead. I think Claudette, were you first? Or maybe Marcia?
Yeah, well, I think as far as messaging, we could still, for the public buildings, or at least the municipal buildings in town, that we could put signs that say masks recommended. And leave it at that. I personally, will I still wear a mask? You betcha. But
right.
I'm in one of those
Me too.
age vulnerable categories.
Marcia, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think that having some signage around wouldn't hurt, as long as it was very carefully worded and basically is, sort of like, we don't know what the situation is, but if anyone is wearing a mask, they should be meant to feel free to do so. Right.
I guess for me, it's like, I think masking is still something that we should encourage as government officials, but it's not something that we feel like we can no longer mandate. And so, like, even to say, as government officials, to say we encourage it, we may even recommend it, but we can't mandate it for businesses and our town. I think that is in of itself something that's powerful and appropriate. But maybe we don't even want to be that. Maybe we don't want that kind of clarity either. That's all. But I think,
well,
go ahead.
I do think that it's important, because you hear about these confrontations where people are actually not attacked, but attention is brought to the fact that they're wearing a mask. I'm expecting to see some of that. And so, not necessarily in Norwich, but if we did, I would like to see that we had some sort of signage that said, personally, the select board believes in continued caution and masking. It is not currently a mandate. However, anyone who wants to wear a mask should feel free to do so without repercussion. Something like that.
I kind of support that. Mary.
Mary, here I am.
Yeah, hi, Mary.
Hi. I think, I don't object to signage, but our signage was very simple. It's just masks are required. So I think to boil it down somehow, masks are welcome, or masks are recommended and welcome, but to just boil it down to a few words if we're going to put out that kind of message. So
masks are wise.
So
to have a wise old owl, you could make it humorous.
So Rod, do you think it's appropriate for signage from the town manager's office to be developed that says that the town of Norwich Select Board encourages but does not require masking, and distribute that in the same channels that we did for the previous signage?
I think they don't want to get into sub clauses in a sign. It's you're breaking one of those basic rules of trying to sell something. Okay. So you should just say signs are welcome. I mean, you should say masks are welcome.
Okay.
If you wanted to put in smaller type at the bottom and encouraged, that'd be fine. But I think just keeping it really simple, that it's welcome.
Okay, great. So we I think we should have is there a motion? Or we don't need a motion if we're just going to let it lapse. Right. But no, Rod is saying, what is Rod saying? What are you saying, Rod?
The appropriate action is to vote the motion down. Yeah, so you go through the process of a motion, because it's a really clear signal and it's a really clear record, and it then won't ever be unclear in the minutes subsequently. So the motion is framed intentionally in the affirmative, and then if a majority of you vote it down, then it fails, and so that's the end of it.
Okay, that's good. So we can do that motion, and then this other motion where we're talking about encouragement can be a second motion. So let's do that. Go ahead, Claudette. Thank you, Rod.
So I move to approve the extension of the Norwich face covering rule to April 25th, 2022.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, seconded by Rob. Okay, so this is to approve the extension of the current mask mandate. So all in favor? Okay, so we're unanimously no, so I won't do roll call for that. And now let's get a second. Let's think, we talked a little bit about what we might want to do for another motion might be go ahead, you got one? Thank you, Claudette.
I move to authorize the town manager to provide signage to town businesses that say masks are welcome. Face
Okay.
masks are welcome.
Okay. Is there a second to that? Seconded by Rob. Any discussion on that?
Friendly amendment,
Sure, what is it?
change that one word to offer, for the town manager to offer.
Amendment accepted.
Okay. Is that motion clear, Rod and Miranda? Okay. So all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Thank you. All right. Let's move on to the big agenda item. I think it's select board goal setting, year in review type stuff. Okay, so thank you for folks who submitted memos for the packet. So what I'm going to do is Rod also had the benefit of reviewing these materials, and then also obviously has been thinking about a lot of town operations and other projects too. We've also been thinking about this in terms of, time and how many meetings we have to implement all of the goals that board members were stated and what Rod and the department heads also want to achieve. So I think what we're going to do is in 12 minutes or so, Rod's going to sort of, or maybe 15 we can go, Rod's going to walk us through some of the high level thinking that he has done, which is also a little bit of a synthesis of everyone else's thinking. And then we'll see where we're at. I think this is a real discussion evening. We can affirm or get more clarity at our next meeting. So we're taking that. Marcia, do you have a clarity question?
Yeah, well, a suggestion maybe. I was thinking it might be easier for all of us if we developed a matrix with, everybody's suggestions, including Rod's.
Oh
And
yeah,
then-
that's what we're going to look at. We're having,
Okay.
I don't know I don't know if it's a matrix per se, but there's this. Rod's going to walk us through this, which is an Excel spreadsheet, but does a high level of organization. And then I'll show you another tool that I worked on as a result of this work that Rod had done. So, and I think we could get towards something that maybe looks cleaner or has more clarity at the next meeting, if that makes sense. Okay, and then you can see, so Rod's going to walk us through this, but you can see, Marcia, that the sort of the orientation question was some of your advice from a previous meeting, things you have to do, things you want to do, things others ask you to do. So
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So Rod, I kind of set you up. You're mute. You're on mute.
Thank you, Roger. So everybody, let me just try to orient you to the screen and let me know if it's legible for you, because it's always hard to tell in this sharing way how it's actually playing out. So what you have here is a basic Excel spreadsheet doing duty as a kind of a Gantt chart. And across the top here, if you can see my little cursor running left to right, is every date of a select board meeting through till town meeting day on March the 8th, 2023. And then these shaded numbers you'll see, so that's April the 27th, but more particularly the shaded numbers with the the shaded box with a red number, so that's November the 23rd and December the 28th. These are potential conflicts, the 23rd and the 28th. The 27th is a Jewish remembrance of the Holocaust, which should be recognized, but is not typically taken as a day. But these two dates do interfere with the normal proceedings of the select board. So we might want to, you as a select board may want to choose different dates, or just push through and meet on those dates, recognizing that they're kind of tough from a public holiday standpoint. So the top two bands, the top three bands are all gray, and they represent this first layer, things that the select board has to do. And so that's administrative functions, it's financial functions, and it's the budget. And so each one of those is played out across the top of the matrix and represent items that are going to be on every agenda. The financials with a red box represent the reporting out from Fielding and or me on the current state. So this is in response to Claudette's request that there'll be monthly financials that will represent the closeout of the previous month. So at the end of 1 month, you will receive information on how we did financially the previous month. When we get to August the 24th, this shaded red box will be the closeout for the entire financial year. And that is the information, at least preliminarily, that we'll be delivering to the auditor along with other information that they request. The purple box here on October the 26th is the expectation of when the auditor will report out to the select board their findings from the audit that they'll have proceeded, undertaken between August and then. So you'll have information from the auditor and our information combined that will inform your budget discussions. The next layer down is important. It's the pace of capital planning review and decisions. And you can see that it's got a certain kind of a sequence, and then there's a block in the July-August timeframe. And that's really when some key decisions about the capital budget need to be made. And then subsequently again in October, once we've got a report out on the previous financial year and the audit, some commitments can be made to how much you're going to fund reserve funds to continue with your capital plan in this timeframe in October. Governance is somewhat self-explanatory on a certain level. I'll come back to that in a little bit more detail later on. Grants and projects, to some extent, it's a similar thing. Primarily, those will be dominated by things such as DPW road projects and bridge projects and things similar to that. There'll be some amount of tying, the grant schedule to our work. This may change quite a bit. And you'll see it play out in a little bit more detail in subsequent sheets. The next color down, the darker shading, is departments. And you'll see that, for instance, tonight, we're going to end up discussing DPW for various reasons. At the end of the month, next month, it'll be the rec department. And then following on that, the fire department and so forth. I mean, this can change, but this is just a suggested way of board members getting used to the idea that about once a month between now and the end of September, you'll be dealing with a town department or sort of an amalgamation of departments each meeting. The idea would be to get a better sense of their operations and in particular focus on their capital planning process. So you'll see that for each time that you see a department, the following meeting, there'll be a capital planning discussion. And that should be primarily focused on the information given in the previous meeting from that department. So you'll have a fresh recollection of what they're asking for and what they want and what their planning process throws up, and then you'll be able to discuss that. What I would also recommend here in this department level is that either with specially warned meetings or separate meetings or as part of the meeting, that you actually visit the various locations. So it's become apparent to me, I guess, that there's a lot of information to be gained from actually visiting the different workplaces and getting a better sense of the operations of the individual departments. And so I haven't scheduled that here, but I think it's a really good idea for the select board to actually move around the various facilities and become familiar with the issues that are thrown up there, most obviously in terms of the capital plan, but other things as well, just the way they operate. So then moving on, you've obviously got intergovernmental relations. By that, I mean the relationship between us and the school board, us and the state government, us and the fire district or whatever, that these are things that will over time come up. Claudette, do you want, is that a question that you're directing to me? I'm happy to take it.
Yeah, Claudette, do you want to, well, actually, why don't you finish the community one and then we'll take a left. Yeah.
And so this last color at the bottom, this dark green, is community. I should point out before I skip over it, but there's the lightest green is related to committees, and that's where committees and commissions are coming to the board with initiatives or ideas or proposals that they are seeking some kind of support from the select board from, or some kind of acknowledgement of their work or direction on their future work. So think of the recent effort with the Childcare Committee's report, or various studies and reports that have been produced by the Planning Commission or similar. And then the last one is that segment of the community that doesn't necessarily fit under the umbrella of existing committees, just genuine community issues that may arise and opportunities for the, if you like, the unorganized community to participate in the proceedings of the select board. So it just might be a genuine public outreach moment or something similar to that. So is this a good time for the question?
I think so, yes. Claudette, do you have a question?
I did, and I appreciate the work that's being done with this. My one question, just, do you require, Rod, that we contact you before we schedule visits with the various departments, or are we free to do that independently?
Let's.
In the past, we've been required to go through the town manager.
Oh, wow. Okay. I would encourage you to, just out of politeness, let whoever it is know, if it's the fire chief or whatever, just to confirm that they're going to be there, and let them know that you just want to walk through. I think what I was kind of thinking was that there'd be kind of a small, not a lengthy presentation, but the department head would host the select board and, identify what goes on, what these pieces of equipment do, how their program operates, what you're looking at, and answer any questions that you'd have. So maybe a little bit more formal than that, but I certainly would encourage select board members individually, if they've got an interest in part of town operations, to certainly let the department head know and make a good time to do it.
Absolutely. I would just not drop in. I would I would contact the department head.
I also see the value in, seeing them as, warned special situations where we have the benefit of operating not quite like a DRB sort of site visit, but it wouldn't be like that, but we would. I think there's some value in attending as a group, but obviously, if yeah. So that's all I'll say. Mary, you had your hand up though.
Yeah, I agree. I was wondering this too. I think there was more value in visiting as a group. Also, that we would tie up less time, I think, of the department heads, and our various questions might inform each other about what's happening. So I think, it being organized would be great. Can't imagine it being this time of night. Might have to be, during the day sometime, but during work hours. So
if we go as a group, it would need to be a warned meeting.
Yeah, it would be warned.
That's the other thing.
Well, we could do that, right?
Yeah, which is fine with me.
Yeah,
I think that would be okay.
Okay.
Just one more on logistics. Okay, sure. So if we do a warned meeting, and then also the public could come along too, right?
There would have to be you would have to define a way for public participation if it's a warned meeting. Is that right, Rod?
Yes, you would. It could be done in a couple of different ways. Obviously there are some facilities that there's a safety risk associated with, but we could certainly, make provision for cordon something off or make public provision for that.
Okay.
Okay. So now we're going into another tab. So can you speak on this at a high level? Go ahead. I didn't see your hand, Marcia. Go ahead.
Rod was going to talk about governance, which seemed to be in a funny place to me. So I wanted to hear why you put it there.
Oh, well, it's a, yeah.
What, where? Like, what do
you mean just to, you mean
as number two, you mean?
I see what we do as governance. So I wonder why it's where it is. I mean, I think of that as mandatory.
It is in some ways mandatory, but there's a sort of a minimalist thing that you need to do, which would be admin, and then there's governance questions where you're thinking about changing structures or doing things. So it's a little arbitrary. I acknowledge that, Marcia, but it's there partly because it relates to changes or potential changes to the organizational structure and the function, and so it's just played out that way, I guess, if that makes sense.
Let's get into some examples of what actually governance looks like before we sort of suggest that it needs to be revised. So go ahead. Can you continue, Rod?
Yeah, that might be the best way of explaining it. So in this instance, this is the next quarter playing out here. So this is the quarter that we're in, the remainder of March and April. So you'll see, for instance, under governance, it's the audit follow-up. So the expectation would be that by the end of April, you'd be reviewing an RFP for the auditor, and so that's a governance question in large part because it's a function that you need to achieve as applied to statute, and then you can get a better sense of where other things play out. For instance, under grants and projects, that's where ARPA would sit in this kind of allocation of activities. Let me move it along a little bit further. I'm just going to jump up my screen here. Okay, so here you begin to see a little bit more consistency. The governance would be taken up with a discussion of the master financial policy in May. That assumes sort of it happening prior to a consultant being appointed or something such as that. This abbreviation here is for discussion of the Recreation Department capital needs. Then you see this pattern emerging here, where there might be a discussion of the fire department capital needs following on from a meeting, that's devoted primarily to the operation of the fire department, so on and so forth. And then it's been mentioned a couple of times in the board members' goals and priorities, the question of whether to merge with the fire district. And so that's an example of intergovernmental relations. And that's where that could potentially sit. Don't know if that's going to be something that you actively pursue, but that's just a kind of an example or a placeholder there. This next section, this next quarter becomes quite a bit more important in some ways because of what's not there. And I think that what I'm trying to emphasize here is you have a certain season, if you like, between now and the beginning of October to do things that are not about the budget. Although obviously a lot of the information that you collect and gather and a lot of the things that you reflect on, including the capital plan, are ultimately connected to the budget. But around about the beginning of October, the budget is going to be the dominant item of discussion. And so what really happens is that there's a sort of a thinning out of the range of issues that you might contemplate. So the way this pattern works is that the review of policies, the adoption of new ordinances, the work of government aside from the budget get addressed between now and the end of September. And then there's a recognition that from the beginning of October through to the end of February is really devoted to the budget and town meeting preparations. You see that more clearly here.
So Rod, how many meetings do we have before we get to budget season?
14 regularly set meetings.
14 meetings. Thanks.
Yep. And so again, you see the shaded out area. And then you've achieved, the end goal, which is by January the 11th, according to statute, you're going to need to approve a budget. So you're going to need to have monetary articles approved. And then the following meeting, you're going to review the town meeting warrant. And then in the last little piece, you need to approve the town meeting warrant on February the 8th, which is not more than 40 or less than 30 days before town meeting day, which is March the 7th. So what I then went to do was, and I'm sorry, Rob, I wasn't able to find the time to assimilate your preferences and goals into this little chart, but I was able to work with other people's, and I do apologize for not having the time I think I saw it from yesterday. So here I've taken some liberties and classified the things that select board members have identified as goals and priorities, and then labeled them. The first column over here, the one to the far left, A, is the primary, and then a couple of them it sort of straddles a few different issues. And so what I've done here is simply try and label your goals or priorities in terms of that color-coded chart, so trying to sort of play out what the agendas would look like for each meeting, with the acknowledgement that, obviously that there's a lot of things to work through. I think it was Marcia that came up with climate mitigation, or maybe it was Mary, I can't quite recall. But what I'd say is that on one level, it's such a important umbrella that we should all be thinking about all the time, but it didn't really neatly fit under just one of these things. So what you see is a lot of work to do with governance questions, quite a bit of work to do with capital planning, and aside from and ARPA and some other grant funded projects and locally funded projects sort of really dominating when you start going through the check marks. And so if you take this, lift this up and then try and put it back into the earlier pages that I've got, you begin to see how it's going to be a little difficult to address all those goals and priorities in the available time, given what else you sort of know you need to do. So on that note, I'm happy to take feedback, or we can move to Roger's work, which is wonderful. The benefit of Roger's work is that he begins to show the dependencies between one thing and another. One process, one goal, if you like, and another. There's critical timing ingredients often in every one of these. So sometimes we can't start to July because that's when the new budget starts, and we need the new budget to start before we can spend those funds. Other times, just is something preliminary needs to be resolved or discussed before you move on, and items such as that really become clearer with Roger's work. So I'm happy if people want to shift to that expression of the same information.
So I'll share it on a high level, and then I'll take your question, Marcia. So
Another question.
I'm going to take your comment after I share my screen. How's that? So
let's stop sharing.
Stop your participants sharing, and then I'll share mine. And so just because I know that people want to comment, start discussing, I'll just simply say that what you're seeing here is sort of an understanding of, oh Lord,
Oh my God, it went.
it's going. Okay. So what you're seeing here is an understanding of tasks that were extracted from Rod's work, where you can see sort of the tasks here. The colors will match Rod's work. And then each of these things here are milestones, right? You could potentially see these milestones as informing the town manager review process. And so this is just the start of looking at, creating tasks from what that could inform future agenda items. Here in the Gantt chart, the only thing I'll demonstrate on a high level is, yes, mapping out relationships with each of these items. So for example, if we wanted to do the Beaver Meadow Road and Huntley Meadow project, we know that it is dependent on hiring of a planning director. So you can see here, the Beaver Meadow, Huntley Meadow RFP comes down to the hiring the planning director. And the hiring the planning director might happen by the end of June. And so that would mean that you wouldn't want to start that until you have that. And then here you see the sidewalk inventory from TRRC may inform the Beaver Meadow Road work. Then the only thing I'll highlight further is if we wanted to there was some discussion of space planning for Tracy Hall. You can see that space planning for Tracy Hall would inform Tracy HVAC upgrades engineering, which goes back up to inform Tracy Hall capital needs discussion. So if you're discussing the Tracy Hall capital needs discussion in September, we know that it needs to be informed by a space planning assessment for Tracy Hall and possibly a knowledge of the upgrades. But the upgrades can't happen before the space planning. So you'll see that in 14 meetings, there would be several tasks enumerated. And then if I can just open what that means, the checklist for potentially for space planning for Tracy Hall, should that be an ARPA desire, there's a checklist that would accompany it. So this could be a tool that gets updated and revised based on our future prioritization, which I think, as Rod's presentation underscores, time is the most precious of assets. So that's that. So, and I think that so any thoughts on anything that Rod put forward for us? Any takeaways from it? Let's start from that. Marcia, you had a comment earlier.
Yeah, I think it's a good start. They're both a good start. Just looking quickly, there were a couple of things that I had put on my list that I didn't see on Rod's, including website work. I had that. So three of the people that reported had that concern. So I'd like to have access to those so that we could make sure that all the things that we are concerned about at least show up somewhere. I'm wondering too if both of these could be on our town website somehow so that people can follow what we're doing and we can be as transparent as possible.
Go ahead, Rod. Do you want to respond to that?
Just really quickly, Marcia, line 15 on that last chart does identify, let me see, I think I write it as update town website, TON website. So it's there, it's definitely there.
It was those check marks there. Mine wasn't checked.
Oh, okay, I apologize.
The last one.
Okay. Yeah. And then Initially, at this point, I guess I envisage this as a planning document and a planning process for you as a board. I think that there are good questions that need to be raised about the traditional way we put together the packet and the complexity of that process, given the combination of technology and labor that we use to produce it. It's time consuming. It usually happens under a fair amount of pressure, and it results in a long, very large document that's very difficult to digest over a very short period of time for you as board members as well as the public. So I'd be interested in trying to explore the best way to address those problems. It may, and again, in a better web page world, I'm sure there's a better solution. I guess I'm not settled on any one. I've not seen a great solution, and I'm not sure what that would look like. But I do want to acknowledge that I think you've raised a good point about how to ensure that the public can have access to these things. But at this point, really, my crazy Excel document was really meant as a planning exercise for this project, for this point, which is your goals and objectives for the coming year.
The only thing I'll add to that, if I may, is any reliance on an Excel spreadsheet or a Gantt chart software, whether it's an internal planning tool or a transparently available document. The project management work of either of these things will inevitably take a back seat if we continue to business as usual with sort of the cumbersome nature of preparing agendas and packets. So I think even the agenda review process could be tightened up and cleaned, because everyone will have the benefit of sort of knowing what is upcoming and sort of knowing how things adjust when we're informed of the dependencies that things have on each other. And so this idea of preparing a 150-page packet would need to go away if we want to rely on any kind of project management tools to be updated in the long term. Go ahead, Marcia.
So are you suggesting that the packet actually would sort of live in this document?
I don't necessarily, I would like to know, but I'm saying in terms of the time. So what I would, I have a particular suggestion for the packet, and I don't necessarily want to take up the space to discuss that here. I think a couple of things would need to happen. So I think the purpose of this exercise was to, communicate that we have 14 meetings outside of budget prep these meetings will be dominated by hearing directly from departments in new formats and convened meetings, and that we will be paying attention to their goals, their outlooks, and their capital needs. That and along with some other special projects will dominate and lead up to a budget process. And so I think when that's understood, it becomes well, what time is left for anything else, a select board, a priority, or otherwise. So I think generally in the next meeting, we could get a consensus on sort of, the chart, and then begin to figure out what we want to do that can be accomplished in whatever remaining time there is. And then we can chart, and time can be spent charting the progress if the packet process is revised. And I'm going to think about that more. It'll just mean making tighter packets and having supplementary information be available digitally only. But anyway, does that explanation that I just offered, which is really just a summary of what Rod offered, make sense? Go ahead, Mary.
I think it makes a great deal of sense to understand the structure and the amount of available time, the dependencies, and the calendar. Part of the effort with the packet, there didn't used to be packets. Like when I came on, I don't believe there was that practice wasn't there. And part of the reason to start that practice was to inform the public. And so, you know, I think there's some kind of, I don't know what you would call it, curating or something, because some projects are sort of in process, and if the public knows fragments of it, they have an incomplete understanding. But other, you know, you don't want to keep everything completely in the dark either. You want your voters to have some confidence. And I think the citizens could actually use some messaging. And that's been problematic in the past, just because, well, who do you trust? You know, who is creating the narrative, and you know, how is that going to go over? But I think that that's a part of the, you know, part of the intent of the packet was to have information go out to the public so they could know something about the workings of their town. Maybe it's possible to build that confidence and kind of relay more about what the select board's doing via this new structural model. So that might, you know, that might be something that works, but just to mention this, so.
Yeah, and let me just say as follow-up, just to be clear, since we're talking about something slightly different but related, is what I would envision is if there's 10 items on the agenda, you would probably have 10-ish pages of packet, because you would be seeing a memo from either Rod or department head that summarizes the supporting material that can be accessible, perfectly accessible elsewhere, but is not part of a cumbersome PDF. And so when people are wanting more information, and we always say something like, it was in the December 22nd packet on page 1 through 49. If you just go and download it from a website that also is too slow because it needs to be updated, you can instead say, there's a 10-page packet with high-level information from our hired professionals, and there's supporting documentation to verify or do whatever else you wish to do that the select board uses in this link over here. And then also we have a project management tool that is PDF'd out into each of the packet, but also is available for viewing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you just link to, for instance, we've had packets that had you know, bidding documents and contracts, and there's a lot of details. So, you know, there are people who are, you know, very interested in that, and it's good for us to go through that, but it doesn't need to be published in a packet. So.
Yeah, or rather it'll just be made available in a different.
In an alternative form where you can link to it. Yes.
And what it does is it makes a commitment of our professionals to provide information and contextualize information always that will be available. And so I think that's a commitment that I understand that Rod and the department heads want to make to us. And we'll be better when we send people. We can simply say, this memo is available to you to read, so you can, you know, see the latest staffing decisions, for example.
Yep.
So I think that is, and I think that would make us more nimble and help us with our own capacities and capabilities as we continue to do all of this work. So that is my TED Talk, and I'll stop TED talking because this is a board meeting. Does that make sense? Go ahead, Rob. You're on mute.
The issue, I think the issue of the packet is a little bit premature. I think it's useful for the public to see all the information that comes in some form or another, but that it desperately needs indexing, referencing, and sectioning. And sadly, that takes a lot of time. So its value would be increased immensely with that. And maybe that happens after the fact, but people should be able to see the issues that the public has coming up in a chronological manner, so that they can see, okay, this meeting there were issues with plowing or something like that, but they need to be referenced to DPW or something about insufficiencies or whatever, just cross-referenced like crazy. And like I say, sadly, that just is very time consuming. And I would not want to put that necessarily onto the staff that's already got a lot to do.
Right. So I want to take the sort of the focus away from the packet and sort of the tools that we are using to work for our agenda setting, and maybe get back to the idea of goal setting a little bit, if that's okay. So do folks, so I guess let me start with this. So do folks see value in every meeting from now until budget time, hearing from a department head? So we'll hear from a department head in a process that Rod will work through with, Rod will work with the department head to prepare them for a presentation before the board on their department. We'll hear one beginning in April, and the next meeting, we listen to that in that meeting, and then the next meeting, we discuss and offer feedback from what we've heard. How do people feel about that model? Go ahead, Marcia.
But when you describe that model, you're not saying that that would be the only thing we have for that meeting.
No, but it would be a big part of it. We would be imagining 45 minutes potentially from spending time with that department head. So it would be a big chunk.
Just wondering if we need that much time.
Okay, any other thoughts? Marcia or Mary?
I'm wondering if this is that we would be hearing less from departments during actual budget time.
Yes.
I mean, okay, so it's sort of front loading
Yes.
that process and giving us time to really get to know the departments and the kind of landscape that they're operating in. And I would be okay with that. I would be wanting to, I don't know about the time. I probably might want to try one out. I don't think I want to go over an hour.
Neither do we. Yeah.
Half an hour might be fine. So.
Okay, and then I'm going to turn to Rod to I'm going to talk to Rob, and then I'm going to turn back to Rod to see what kind of questions, what kind of back and forth would be imagined in that process. Go ahead, Rob Gear.
That's exactly what I was going to ask and suggest. Some sort of a template of what's expected from each department.
So how do you foresee or imagine a successful process going, Rod? Can you explain that? I think this was the this was the department one. Yeah, go ahead.
I like that association though, Roger. So I would say that the department question will feed back into questions of governance. I think it might have been Claudette that posed the possibility that looking into the medium to longer term future, the structure of our departments needs to get revisited. And then the staffing, what staffing needs we envisage in the future, and whether we have appropriate staffing to do the program that we want to do. Each of the department heads, is charged with having expertise in their field and a long-range plan. And in a narrow sense, that's represented and expressed through the capital planning process. And in the broader sense, it's bringing together the various vision statements that the town participates in, including the town plan and other policy documents, and even some things that are less frequently articulated, like a set of expectations about how a basic service should be performed. Sometimes it's unspoken, sometimes it's unwritten but spoken. So what level of service should we be providing with regard to road service and maintenance in winter? What's our expectations? What are the tensions or pressures there? What do we envisage in the future? So there are groups also within the community that through the boards and commissions structure that have an interest in the future of government, like the Article 36 task force, that express expectations and show a vision that, for instance, shows Tracy Hall moving to a post-fossil fuel heating source, or changing the fleet, in various parts of the town organization to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So these departmental specific sessions are a moment that might be able to be templated, and I think there can be, but there might be some sort of bits hanging outside the template, where in the medium to longer term, your department head is going to present a vision for that department that's responsive to these things that the town has already articulated, and show what would be needed to implement those visions or policies, and or what progress they can possibly make in the coming year. So what I'd hope would come out of that is a greater comfort level on the level of among the select board members of what a particular department does day to day, what it looks like, what they're involved in, how they allocate their work, how they spend their budget, what things come up for them, and what they envision in the future being. And so that deeper familiarity should make the budget setting process more efficient, because you won't necessarily be asking questions like, well, do you really need that thing? Or like, why do you need another one? Or what happened to so-and-so? Because you'll actually have a better sense of what's going on. And then I think that there are really good questions to ask about space allocation in Tracy Hall. If we put money into the website, do we find, and because it's not just building a new website, it's maintaining that new website. Does that mean that we end up saving money in other parts of government operations? Can we reduce our paper consumption? Can we change the number of hours that people stand in front of the photocopier, scanning, making PDFs? If you can genuinely reduce that, because now it's probably up above 40 hours a week that there's a person standing in front of the photocopier making it do scans so that you can read it later, right? If we can move away from that, then that person can do something else, hopefully more meaningful than cursing at a 15-year-old machine. And we can achieve efficiencies. You won't necessarily know that or feel that unless you're going to engage with these departments at where they are. And so I feel like if that's the kind of information I'm hoping that the department heads can share with you. Where does the recreation department see it being in 5 years' time? What's that going to look like? How is the recreation department going to respond to the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? What are the greenhouse gas emissions associated with a basketball game in Tracy Hall? What are the greenhouse gas emissions associated with a game of soccer at Huntley Meadows? How do we know that? What do we do about that? Can we make changes in the way we do things and still achieve the soccer games and the basketball games, or do we need to do something else? So right now we have a general sense of what our operations do. To get back to the climate mitigation question, we have a sense of how much fuel oil we use and how much gasoline we use. So we have a rough sense of our greenhouse gas emissions, but we've not broken that out program by program, day by day. And what would we be willing to give up to achieve something somewhere else, right? So there's this notion that if the select board is really clear about meeting particular goals and levels of performance, then what is it going to take to do that? And what is the experience of trying to achieve that like for a department? Do we plow less often? Do we use the grader less often? Why? How would we justify that? How would we explain that to the public? These are all the sort of questions that I think, without wanting to be too abstract and philosophical about it, but it's really bringing together, if you like, the competing pieces that we talk about often at select board meetings, and then laying it out in how do we run Norwich.
Right. And because they'll be specifically focused on capital, it'll be a kind of like there'll be a work product that is expected after the conversations, a revised work product rather.
Mm-hmm.
And we won't risk sort of talking just about everyone's sort of hopes and dreams and challenges, but rather, getting down we have a work product that we have to, the conversation has to be structured in a very specific or particular way in order to meet that work product. So it's not, it won't be 45 minutes of a visioning exercise. It'll be 45 minutes of trying to get to determining needs, I guess, is to address Rob and Marcia's sort of good wondering about whether or not that's time well spent. Mary?
Is it fair to say, and I think this is a good process to go down, for instance, with DPW, that before we were convened as a select board in a meeting to talk about goals and to sort it out, that we would have had our tour of DPW and had a chance to, get to know it. But that would be necessary preparation for any of these. So it seems to me it's almost at least a two-part effort. Is that the way it's being envisioned?
I hadn't gotten as far as you just did then, Mary. I think that's an excellent insight. It kind of knocks me back a little bit trying to find the extra time, but I actually think that you make a really good point. Yeah, I think that would make it much more worthwhile as an exercise.
Well, I think that, just looking at how it was couched in the, your Excel. So, okay, DPW, and we're going to go and really get to know it. And then I'm a school teacher. I think, when are we going to, what's the lesson plan? When are we going to actually show up? What time of day is it going to be? When we're going to be able to do this? But I also think it's really valuable, like just to walk around and see what's there and ask the questions. I think that's a really valuable, but time-consuming, thing to do. And then using our meetings very efficiently is also good when we finally convene and we have to make these decisions. So I like it. It's sort of experimental, but I'm hoping we can pull this off. Yes, I'm going to say.
Yeah, there needs to be accountability. Marcia?
I was actually going to recommend that we get out and see the different departments, because I want to see where people live and what they're doing and talk to all of the people. My concern is that things change over time. This year, is a good example with what's going on with the war. And so I'm kind of afraid that we might do a bit of wasting time if we get too much information that we then have to revisit later because there's been massive changes we couldn't have anticipated. So I'd like to be judicious about how we do it, but I'm willing to start experimenting with it.
Okay, yeah, I hear that. Claudette or Rob, and then I'll get back to Mary. Any thoughts on sort of just this one idea in a larger chart?
I'm more than willing to let's start this process and see how it works. To address Marcia's point about things changing, that's been my concern too. But I think having the background will probably allow us to be able to go with the flow much more easily than not having that background. Am I making sense? So those are my thoughts. Yeah, it's the working in the other pieces that the other governance pieces that we've identified as priorities and have been left hanging out there for a year or two that are also my concern. Like a dog ordinance or an animal ordinance,
right?
For example.
And I think this process doesn't, necessarily say no to that. It just says that you might not get something else, and we have to decide. Rob was next, and then back to Marcia.
So it strikes me that in agenda setting, we should note in the suggested agendas which items are specific to these long-term goals and scheduled for that period of time so that we realize the urgency of making sure we're on schedule. Number two, it would be, I think, really useful to try and apportion our meetings into different time segments. And keep in mind, for instance, as was mentioned, the department reports should be half an hour, should be 45 minutes, whatever that is, but allow for time for other issues to be taken into consideration.
Right, almost leave them intentionally an hour less than you would think, because you're going to need that time, either because they'll go over or because something will come up. So if we're wanting to end meetings at 8:30, haha, it's 9:20, we need to almost be prepared to be done by 8, knowing that we have 45 minutes built in or something. Yeah,
it would also perhaps put some limitations on what comes up in any particular meeting, knowing that we only have we have 10 things we'd like to address, but 30 minutes or 25 minutes to do it. It might be a little difficult to even try to do that.
right. And I think, yeah, I agree. And I'm just responding like this just because I think about agenda setting a little bit, is that
yes,
in that presentation moment, that you have you can ask your department heads to sort of keep a presentation to 45 minutes. You can ask questions of clarity, but you have an agenda item next time where you're going to think about what was heard and like have potentially more time to break it down. But and that provides the flexibility where it's just, it becomes more clear. Like a discussion will take an hour, a presentation will take 45 minutes, but not at the same time. So it revolves memory and creating, board members are going to have to create work, so to speak, in between those meetings. Like either they can respond in whatever way, in whatever learning style they have, whether it be a memo submitted to the town manager or a list of questions that they prepare, whatever it is. Okay. All right, so that's that facet. The one thing I want to get to, because we're sort of over, is this question of ARPA. You go ahead. Did you have any other questions, Marcia, before I move on to that one?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that I hope that the schema that Rod showed first was just a first blush, because it looked a little thin. And I want to keep in mind that we need to do the work of the town, and that's not always evident because stuff comes up. So I think this needs to be an organic process that we agree. Sometimes it's not going to go to plan because something has come up and we do have to take care of that business.
Yeah, I think we'll both, I think it'll be filled out further once we sort of get a general sense of this is a good approach. So I want to move to ARPA a little bit. I think the suggestion that I would have, that I would like to get some feedback on for the purposes of this meeting at 9:23, is something that Claudette has suggested a while ago. I think a first good step is to invite a representative from TROC to present to us a little bit about the latest guidance. There's longer presentations that have been available in other towns and in other spaces, and there's obviously certainly webinars and what have you, but I think, we could invite them and invite her to speak and or to share information with us, and then also ask a set of questions that are particular to Norwich to inform a future process. So for example, we know that we're going to want to put at least some of this funding towards Tracy Hall. And I know that because we've sort of gotten some head nods on that in the past. So we could invite her to do a presentation and then ask potentially more focused questions about municipal building renovations and what have you. So I think for right now, I would like to see if people agree with that suggestion as a way to advance the work of ARPA and then continue to go from there. We're nodding a little bit. Rod, is that a good suggestion? Okay. Marcia?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to start. I'm very concerned about making sure that we hear from people in town, and I also would like to make sure that there aren't any other initiatives going on in the state that would be other monies, so that we could be sure that we were, getting the best use of all funds and not wasting ARPA if there was something else.
Right, like H518 is money for a municipal building.
Exactly.
Did Rod or was it Claudette who had her hand? Claudette.
Yeah, I was just going to say, unfortunately, until the legislative session ends, we won't know specifics about state ARPA or the Fed's money coming into the state and how the state is going to allocate those funds. So there's going to always be a bit of a lag, but we need to get started for sure. So, and I'm more than happy to hear somebody give us a overarching presentation.
Okay.
Let's just get started.
Okay. Rod, we talked a little bit about just one aspect of sort of how we could, make best use of these 14 meetings. Anything else that you would have liked to have heard from us in this discussion? Obviously, we're going to bring back something with more fidelity for board members, and we'll talk more at their next meeting. But anything that you feel like you needed approval or consensus on from us?
I think this is a great first start, and I recognize that that people have got meaningful contributions and some questions about how this is going to work. I do too. So I'd like to get it rolling, and then we can always make adjustments, or if it's really not working, just say that. But I really feel like if I was to characterize what I think we need to do, which ironically ARPA is going to sort of help us do, is to really focus on our own, issues. So there's a lot to do, and so that was the impetus behind kind of plotting this out. And so I appreciate the feedback, and I think we can. I'll take this back to the department heads, and we can move forward with this. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll, in the interest of time, if nothing else, we'll know that this is to be continued, and we'll maybe move on to our next agenda item. If that's okay. All right. So, do we want to? Mary? Do you want to help us with some motions? Next item is a executive session for personnel.
Okay. I move to make a finding that premature public knowledge of the select board's position relative to employee relations would place the town at a substantial disadvantage.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you, unanimous.
Okay, there's part two.
Yep.
I move to enter executive session under 1 VSA section 313A1F, confidential attorney-client communications made for the purpose of providing professional legal services to discuss a personnel issue and to include the town manager.
Yep. Okay, is there a second? Okay, I saw Rob, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, I'm going to put folks in the waiting room. We won't, there will likely not necessarily, I can't tell you if there'll necessarily be any action, but this is the last agenda item in our agenda. And Miranda, we're happy to record the timings if you would like to jump off. Okay. All right, so I'm going to move folks into the waiting room and just keep board members for this executive session. Okay, is there a motion to enter public session?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Marcia. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, we're now in public session.
So just, Roger, just to point out to the public that Rob Gear left the select board meeting when we, prior to our entering executive session.
Yes,
Right.
thank you. And the meeting minutes will reflect that. Okay, with no action taken, we will move on to our next item, which is adjournment. Is there
I
a
move to
motion?
adjourn.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, seconded by Marcia. All in favor, please raise your hand. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Night.